Our story today kicks off with just one thing: a mysterious drum left behind in a rundown warehouse. But what's inside? Well, that's going to take us on a journey through a really chilling crime, looking at the science of forensics, the psychology of a killer, and even the secrets of how a crime story like this is made to sound so real. So let's get into it. So picture this. It's a warehouse that the locals all call the haunted place. It's late, about 11:30 at night, and Inspector Rajiv steps inside to this just awful, sickening smell. His flashlight cuts through the darkness and lands on it, a single blue iron drum, leaking some kind of black, sticky liquid. His order is short and grim: open it. And what they find inside, it's about to kick off one of the most twisted forensic cases of his entire career. All right, Section 1, The Secret of the Drum. We're starting with that grim discovery. We're going to break down the science of exactly what happens to a body after death and how investigators can actually read the clues a killer leaves behind, especially when they use chemicals to try and cover their tracks. So inside the drum, there's a body. It's been folded and literally forced in there. The skin is described as white and shriveled, and the face is just unrecognizable because of all the chemical damage. For Inspector Rajiv, there's only one thing to go on: a gold chain around the victim's neck with a small pendant, the letter M. It's not much, but it's the first thread he can start to pull. To really get what the killer was trying to do here, we have to understand the natural process they were trying to mess with. See, decomposition has two main stages. First, there's something called autolysis, which is basically the body's own enzymes breaking down cells from the inside out. Then comes putrefaction, and that's when bacteria, mostly from our gut, get to work breaking down tissues into gases, liquids, and salts. Now, killers often use chemicals, thinking they can speed all this up, but the thing is, their choice leaves its own unique forensic signature. For instance, an alkali like lye will liquefy soft tissue. A strong acid, on the other hand, will dehydrate and char it, sometimes even dissolving bone. But that white and shriveled look in our case, that points right to something like bleach, which, and this is so important, can actually preserve hard tissues long enough for DNA to be found. The killer's method just gave the police their next clue. And there's a very specific version of this process called saponification. This is what happens when an alkali, like lye, reacts with body fat. It literally creates this waxy, almost soap-like stuff, which leads to that preserved, shriveled look on the skin. It's a tactic people use to try and hide a body's identity, but it almost never works perfectly. Just like the chemicals couldn't destroy that gold chain, they often fail to erase every single piece of evidence. So let's move on to Section 2, the invisible crime scene. The forensics on the body told investigators something huge. The murder didn't happen at the warehouse. So now the whole investigation pivots to the victim's home, and this is where it gets really tough. How do you solve a case when the crime scene has seemingly been completely erased? So here's the massive problem they're facing. The post-mortem report confirms that the victim, a businessman named Manoj Verma, was killed in his own house. But when Inspector Rajiv gets there, the place is spotless. It's almost too clean. This is a classic forensic nightmare. How in the world do you find evidence that someone has worked really, really hard to get rid of? Well, investigators have a whole toolkit for this. They start with the non-destructive stuff. First, they use something called oblique lighting, basically shining a super bright light at a low angle across floors and walls. This can reveal tiny textures, like swirl marks from someone scrubbing like crazy. Next, they bring out an alternate light source, or ALS, which uses different kinds of light to make biological fluids glow or darken. And then, of course, the most famous tool of them all, luminol. The power of luminol is just mind-blowing. It reacts with the iron in our blood's hemoglobin, and it causes any trace of blood to give off this brief, eerie blue-white glow. It is so sensitive, it can find a single drop of blood, even if it's been diluted by 1,000,000 parts of water. Think about that. It makes it pretty much impossible to ever wash a crime scene completely clean. And it's this exact science that leads Inspector Rajiv to a patch of fresh cement out in the backyard. See, while the killers scrubbed the house clean, they made a critical mistake outside. Rajiv's order is immediate: start digging. And sure enough, underneath that cement, they find layers of dried blood. That's the proof they needed. The murder happened right here. Okay, so by now we've established the what and the how. The forensic evidence is just overwhelming. But that brings us to the most difficult question in any case, right? The why. What could possibly drive someone to do something so violent and so desperate? Faced with the undeniable proof from the backyard,
Manoj's wife, Reena, finally confesses. She says the trigger was finding out about his affair. They got into a huge argument, he slept her, and in that one moment, something snapped. She grabbed a nearby iron rod. It was a brutal end to what everyone thought was a perfect marriage. Reena's motive, tragically, fits into a pattern that criminologists have studied for years. While motives that are all about possession and control are more often seen with male perpetrators, defense against abuse is a pretty common trigger for women. And infidelity, that feeling of betrayal, that threat to your whole identity, that's a powerful motivator for both genders. It seems like Reena's crime was a devastating mix of defense and betrayal. And what's really important to understand is that these acts are rarely just a sudden crime of passion. Researchers often call them the result of mute suffering, that final violent explosion after years of emotional neglect or control or abuse. The final fight wasn't the cause. It was just the breaking point in a long, invisible war.
And that brings us to our final section, the sound of the crime. We've dug into the forensics and the criminal psychology, but there's one last layer to our story today. See, our source material wasn't a police report. It's an audio drama. And that brings up a really fascinating question. How is the sound of a crime like this actually made? Think about it. In an audio drama, you don't have any visuals. The entire world has to be built with just sound. So how do the creators make an experience so real that it feels like you're right there in that warehouse, hearing the drum being opened, or worse, in that room during that final fatal argument? Well, the answer is Foley, which is the art of creating sound effects, and it is a world of some seriously bizarre magic. That horrible sound of a bone breaking, it's often just someone snapping a stalk of celery next to a microphone. A crushing skull, that's the sound of walnuts being smashed, and the sick thud of an iron rod hitting someone, that can be recreated by whacking a slab of meat. It's wild. The most terrifying sounds often come from the most ordinary things. We end with the story's really powerful closing lines. In this world, no secret stays hidden forever. The truth, in some form or another, definitely comes back. And, that isn't just a dramatic ending, it's a forensic reality. Whether it's the blue glow of luminol in a supposedly clean floor, or a gold chain surviving a chemical bath, or a killer's final confession, the story of this drum reminds us that it doesn't matter how deep you try to bury a secret, the truth